Captain Sarah Chen stood at the observation deck of the human colony ship Defiance, watching the alien fleet surround them like hungry predators circling wounded prey. The Caltharian vessels gleamed silver against the black void, their biomechanical hulls pulsing with organic light patterns that seemed almost alive. Sarah had seen those patterns before, during the massacre at New Geneva Colony. The communication panel crackled to life, filling the bridge with the harsh, clicking sounds of the Caltharian language. The translation software struggled to keep up, producing choppy English phrases that still managed to convey the aliens' arrogance. Human vessel, you carry weapons. This violates Galactic Protection Accord. Surrender immediately. Sarah's jaw tightened. The Galactic Protection Accord, signed by every major species in the galaxy except humanity, prohibited any form of defensive weaponry on civilian vessels. The other species claimed it promoted peace and prevented conflicts from escalating. In reality, it made entire populations helpless against raiders like the Caltharians. "Captain," whispered Lieutenant Torres from the tactical station, "they're powering up their primary weapons. Hull-breach torpedoes from the looks of it." Sarah knew those weapons well. They didn't destroy ships cleanly. Instead, they punched holes in the hull just large enough for Caltharian boarding parties to swarm through. What happened next was why humans called them the Bone Collectors. The Defiance carried 12,000 colonists bound for the frontier world of Haven's Rest. Families, children, elderly people seeking a new life far from Earth's overcrowded cities. Sarah had sworn an oath to protect them all, but the Galactic Protection Accord made that oath nearly impossible to keep. "Incoming transmission from the lead Caltharian vessel," reported Communications Officer Williams. "They're demanding to speak with you directly, Captain." "Put them through." The main screen flickered, revealing the nightmarish visage of a Caltharian war chief. The creature stood nearly 8 feet tall, its exoskeleton a deep purple-black that seemed to absorb light. Forearms ended in razor-sharp claws, while compound eyes the size of dinner plates reflected the bridge lights like fractured mirrors. Most disturbing were the bone ornaments woven into its carapace. Trophies from previous hunts, human female. The war chief spoke through vocal cords that sounded like grinding metal. "I am Vex Thalar, the Spine Render. Your ship carries forbidden weapons. You will disable all defenses and prepare for boarding." Sarah stepped forward, her boots clicking against the metal deck plating. She wore the simple blue uniform of the colonial fleet. No armor, no weapons visible. By galactic law, she was supposed to be helpless. "War Chief Vex Thalar," she replied calmly. "We carry only standard defensive systems as permitted under human colonial charters. We pose no threat to your vessels." The alien's mandibles clicked together in what Sarah recognized as laughter. "Defensive systems are weapons, human. All species know this truth. You will comply, or we will take your ship by force. Your bones will make fine additions to my collection." Behind the war chief, Sarah could see other Caltharians preparing boarding pods. Their weapons gleamed with cruel efficiency, designed not to kill quickly but to harvest bone and cartilage from living victims. The Caltharians believed that bones taken from creatures that died in terror possessed special properties. "I have 12,000 civilians aboard this ship," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "They are protected under interstellar law." "Only if you carry no weapons," Vex Thalar replied. "Your defensive systems mark you as combatants. There are no civilians on a warship." The twisted logic was perfect in its cruelty. By forcing ships to choose between protection and civilian status, the Galactic Protection Accord had created a feeding ground for predators. Species like the Caltharians could attack with impunity, knowing their victims could either fight back and lose legal protection, or remain defenseless and die anyway. Sarah had spent 15 years in the colonial fleet, rising through the ranks by following orders and respecting regulations. She believed in law and order, in the idea that civilization meant something. But watching Caltharian boarding pods detach from their motherships, she realized that some laws were written by the strong to keep the weak helpless. "Captain," Torres called out, "boarding pods will reach us in 6 minutes. Their trajectory suggests they're targeting the civilian quarters first." Of course they were. The Caltharians preferred to harvest bones from the young and old, claiming they were more flexible and easier to work with. Sarah thought of the Martinez family in Section C, with their twin daughters who couldn't be more than 5 years old. She thought of old Pete in the senior quarters, who told stories about Earth's oceans to anyone who would listen. "Sir," Williams spoke up, his voice tight with fear. The Caltharian fleet is hailing all frequencies. They're broadcasting surrender demands to the entire ship. Throughout the Defiance, 12,000 people were learning that their protection came with conditions they couldn't meet. They could live as victims or die as combatants, but they couldn't live as both civilians and human beings who refused to kneel. Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew. These men and women had followed her across half the galaxy, trusting her to keep them alive. They looked at her now with the same trust, even as death approached in the form of purple-black exoskeletons and bone-collecting claws. The captain's chair felt heavier as she settled into it. Through the view screen, she could see the Caltharian boarding pods growing larger, their organic hulls pulsing with anticipation. In 6 minutes, aliens who viewed humans as nothing more than walking bone gardens would breach their hull. "Torres," she said quietly, "bring all defensive systems online." "Sir, that violates the protection accord. Once we arm ourselves, we lose civilian status." Sarah Chen had spent her entire adult life following rules written by people who would never face their consequences. She had believed that civilization meant compromise, that peace required sacrifice. But looking at those boarding pods, thinking of the children in Section C and the elders telling stories, she finally understood what her grandmother had tried to teach her years ago. Some things were worth more than law. Some things were worth more than peace. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight stripped away every protection except the one that mattered most. "I know exactly what it means, Lieutenant. Arm all weapons." The moment the Defiance's weapon systems came online, alarms began shrieking throughout the ship. Not from external threats, but from the Galactic Monitoring Station's automated systems detecting prohibited defensive armaments. Within seconds, Sarah's communication panel lit up with incoming messages from a dozen different species, all condemning humanity's violation of the Protection Accord. "Captain," Williams reported, his voice strained, "we're receiving formal protests from the Zentari Confederacy, the Mektar Hive, and the—" He paused, checking his screen. "The entire Galactic Council is demanding we power down immediately." Sarah ignored the cascade of alien outrage. Through the tactical display, she watched the Caltharian boarding pods closing the final distance to her ship, 3 minutes until impact. Behind them, the main Caltharian fleet maintained formation, their weapon systems still charging but not yet firing. They were confident this would be another easy harvest. "Torres, target the lead boarding pod. Railgun, minimum power." "Sir, even minimum power will punch right through their hull. They have no shields, no armor worth mentioning." "I'm counting on it." The Defiance shuddered slightly as the railgun fired. A projectile smaller than Sarah's thumb, moving at a significant fraction of light speed, intersected the path of the lead boarding pod. The alien craft simply disappeared, converted to expanding plasma and scattered debris in less than a microsecond. The effect on the Caltharian fleet was immediate and dramatic. Every ship began emergency maneuvers, their organic hulls rippling with distress patterns. The remaining boarding pods changed course, suddenly uncertain about their easy prey. War Chief Vextalar's image reappeared on the main screen, his compound eyes blazing with fury. "Human, you have violated sacred law. The galaxy will hear of this treachery." "The galaxy can hear whatever it wants," Sarah replied calmly. "But it will hear it from someone other than you." She gestured to Torres, who launched a spread of missiles at the remaining boarding pods. The small craft scattered like startled insects, their pilot suddenly remembering that predators could become prey with alarming speed. "You have doomed your species," Vextalar shrieked. "The Galactic Council will strip away all human rights. You will be declared outlaws across the galaxy." "We were already outlaws the moment we refused to die quietly," Sarah said. "The only difference is that now we're outlaws who fight back." The Caltharian war chief began a long, chittering tirade about honor and law and the natural order of things. Sarah cut the transmission. She had heard enough alien philosophy to last several lifetimes, most of it designed to explain why humans should accept being victims. "Captain," Torres called out, "the main Caltharian fleet is moving into attack formation." "They're not backing down." Sarah studied the tactical display. 15 Caltharian ships against 1 human colony vessel. Under normal circumstances, it would be a massacre. The Caltharians had superior numbers, newer technology, and decades of experience hunting defenseless prey, but these weren't normal circumstances anymore. "Open ship-wide communications," Sarah ordered. Williams nodded. "All decks receiving, Captain." Sarah stood knowing that 12,000 people were listening to her words. Families huddled in their quarters, children hiding behind parents, elderly couples holding hands and remembering lives lived under distant stars, all of them waiting to learn whether they would live as free humans or die as Caltharian trophies. This is Captain Chen speaking to all hands and passengers. As you may know, we are currently surrounded by hostile alien forces. These creatures, the Caltharians, make their living by attacking defenseless ships and harvesting bones from the passengers. They target children and elderly people because their bones are easier to work with. She paused, letting that sink in. Throughout the ship, parents pulled their children closer. The Galactic Protection Accord was supposed to prevent this. Instead, it guaranteed it. By forbidding us to carry weapons, the law made us perfect victims. We could die with legal protection or live as outlaws. There was no third option. Sarah looked around the bridge at her crew. Each face reflected the same grim determination she felt building in her chest. I chose a third option anyway. We will fight. We will protect our families. We will defend our children and our elderly and everyone in between. And if that makes us criminals in the eyes of the galaxy, then the galaxy can find new eyes. She gestured to Torres again. The tactical officer brought up a ship-wide display showing the approaching Caltharian fleet. I want every person on this ship to see what we're facing. 15 alien warships crewed by creatures who view us as walking decorations for their armor. They're bigger than us, they outnumber us, and they have weapons designed specifically for cracking open colony ships. The display zoomed in on one of the Caltharian vessels, showing its sleek predatory lines and the bone ornaments embedded in its hull. But they have one crucial weakness. They've never faced prey that fought back. They've never encountered victims who refuse to be victims. They've been hunting helpless civilians for so long, they've forgotten how to fight soldiers. Sarah smiled, and there was something fierce and dangerous in that expression. Today, they learn the difference. Today, they discover what happens when humans stop following laws written by aliens who want us dead. Today, we remind the galaxy why our ancestors climbed to the top of the food chain on a planet full of predators. Throughout the ship, people began to move. Families gathered in the reinforced sections. Engineers checked the ship's systems. Even civilian passengers found ways to help, organizing supply lines and medical stations. The Defiance had been designed as a colony ship, but its passengers were descendants of humans who had conquered Earth through cooperation, intelligence, and sheer bloody-minded refusal to quit. Today, those traits would be tested against the void itself. All stations report ready. Captain, Torres announced. Through the view screen, Sarah could see the Caltharian fleet completing its attack formation. Vexthalar's ship moved to the center, its hull ornaments glittering with reflected starlight. Each bone told a story of a life taken, a family destroyed, a species that had chosen to die legally rather than live as outlaws. Take us directly at them, Sarah ordered. Full speed, the crew stared at her in shock. Charging 15 enemy ships seemed like suicide. Sarah's smile grew wider. They expect us to run or hide or beg for mercy. They've never fought anyone who charged straight into their teeth. Let's give them a proper human welcome. The Defiance accelerated toward the Caltharian fleet like a bullet fired from the hand of an angry god. Sarah watched the tactical display as the distance closed rapidly. Alien ships growing larger on the view screen. The Caltharians had expected the human ship to try escaping or to hide behind debris fields. They had not expected a direct assault. 2 minutes to weapons range, Torres reported, his fingers dancing across the tactical controls. Caltharian ships are maintaining formation, but their targeting systems are having trouble locking onto us. Our approach vector seems to be confusing their fire control, Sarah nodded grimly. The Caltharians were used to hunting stationary or fleeing targets. A ship charging directly at superior numbers created targeting solutions their computers had never been programmed to handle. Captain, Williams called out, receiving another transmission from the Galactic Council. They're ordering us to stand down immediately and surrender to Caltharian custody. Tell the Galactic Council that humans don't surrender to bone collectors, Sarah replied, and remind them that outlaws don't follow Galactic Council orders. The communication officer almost smiled as he composed the message. Throughout the bridge, Sarah could feel the mood shifting from desperate fear to something much more dangerous. Her crew was beginning to understand that they weren't victims anymore. They were predators with nothing left to lose. 1 minute to weapons range, Torres announced. Caltharian fleet is finally responding. They're spreading out, trying to surround us. Too late, Sarah muttered, studying the tactical display. The aliens' formation was breaking apart as individual ships tried to gain advantageous positions. What had been a coordinated hunting pack was becoming a scattered mob of confused predators. The Defiant screamed through space toward Vexithalar's command ship, directly at the center of the enemy formation. Sarah could see the massive Caltharian vessel growing larger on the screen, its bone decorations clearly visible now. Hundreds of them, maybe thousands, each one representing a life taken during their raids on defenseless colonies. 30 seconds to range, Torres called out. All weapons locked on target. Sarah stood behind her tactical officer, one hand resting on the back of his chair. Through the view screen, she could see individual Caltharians moving on the enemy ship's bridge, their forearms gesturing frantically as they tried to coordinate a response to the humans' unexpected charge. Fire. Everything, she ordered quietly. The Defiance unleashed, its full arsenal in a concentrated barrage that lit up space like a miniature star. Railgun projectiles, missiles, and particle beams all converged on Vexithalar's ship in the span of 3 seconds. The Caltharian vessel's organic hull rippled and bulged as projectiles punched through its defenses, then exploded in brilliant flashes as missiles found their targets. But Sarah wasn't finished. As the Defiance closed the final distance, she gave an order that would have been unthinkable under the Protection Accord. Ram them. Torres's eyes widened. Captain, a collision at this speed will damage both ships severely. We might not survive, neither will they, Sarah cut him off. And that's the point. Show them what happens when humans stop caring about survival and start caring about winning. The Defiance struck Vexthalar's ship just aft of its main weapon systems. The colony ship's reinforced prow, designed to push through asteroid fields, punched through the Caltharian vessel's hull like a spear through wet paper. Both ships shuddered under the impact, their hulls screaming as metal and organic material tore apart. Emergency lighting flickered across the bridge as the Defiance ground deeper into the enemy ship. Sarah felt the deck plates vibrating under her feet, heard the groaning of stressed metal throughout the ship's structure, but they were still moving, still fighting, still alive. Hull breach in sections 7 through 12, Williams reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. Emergency force fields are holding. Minimal casualties so far. Through the view screen, Sarah could see directly into the Caltharian ship's interior. Aliens scrambled through corridors filled with floating debris and emergency lights, their compound eyes wide with panic. They had never experienced being boarded before. They were always the ones doing the boarding. Torres organized boarding parties. I want teams in environmental suits searching that ship for prisoners and intelligence. Sir, boarding enemy vessels violates about 17 different interstellar treaties. Sarah turned to look at her tactical officer. Lieutenant, we became outlaws the moment we chose to protect our families instead of feeding them to bone collectors. If we're going to be criminals, we might as well be thorough criminals. Torres grinned, the expression transforming his boyish face into something predatory. Aye, Captain. I'll take the first team myself. As boarding parties assembled throughout the ship, Sarah watched the remaining Caltharian vessels on the tactical display. The aliens were still trying to form an attack formation, but their movements seemed uncertain now. Their leader was dead or dying, and their prey had just demonstrated a level of viciousness they had never encountered before. Enemy ships are moving to surround us, Williams reported, but they're maintaining distance. I think we scared them. Good, Sarah replied. Fear is a new emotion for them. Let's give them plenty of time to experience it. The Defiance was locked in a deadly embrace with Vexthalar's ship, neither vessel able to break free without catastrophic damage. But Sarah had no intention of breaking free. She wanted the other Caltharians to see exactly what their leader's ship looked like after encountering humans who refused to die quietly. Captain, Torres's voice crackled through the comm system from somewhere inside the enemy vessel. You need to see this. I'm sending visual data now. The main screen shifted to show Torres's helmet camera feed. He was moving through a section of the Caltharian ship that looked like a museum of horrors. Walls lined with carefully arranged bones, each one polished and decorated according to alien aesthetic principles. But these weren't random bones. They were organized by species, by age, by the circumstances of death. There's a whole section dedicated to human remains, Torres reported, his voice tight with controlled anger. Children's skulls arranged in spiral patterns, Adult bones carved with what look like hunting trophies. They've been doing this for a long time, Captain. Sarah felt something cold and hard settle in her chest. The Galactic Protection Accord hadn't just failed to protect human civilians. It had enabled systematic genocide, turning entire species into decorative objects for alien trophy collections. How many? She asked quietly. Hundreds, sir. Maybe thousands. And that's just the human remains. There are bones here from dozens of species. Through the view screen, Sarah watched the remaining Caltharian ships finally completing their formation, 14 vessels moving to attack the crippled human ship, locked in their leader's death grip. They probably expected the humans to surrender now, to accept death with dignity rather than fighting to the bitter end. They were about to learn their first lesson in human stubbornness. All hands. Prepare for battle, Sarah announced shipwide. We're outnumbered 14-1. Our ship is damaged and we're locked in combat with a dying enemy vessel. According to every military manual ever written, we should surrender now. She paused, watching the enemy ships closing distance. But military manuals are written by people who never had to choose between their children's lives and alien law. Today we write our own manual. Today we show the galaxy what happens when humans stop following rules and start following their hearts. The 14 remaining Caltharian ships approached like circling vultures, their organic hulls pulsing with aggressive bioluminescent patterns. Sarah could see their weapon systems charging, preparing to finish what their leader had started. But something had changed in the aliens' movements. Where before they had swooped in with predatory confidence, now they maintained careful distances, probing for weaknesses rather than striking directly. They're afraid, Williams observed, monitoring the enemy communications. I'm picking up scattered transmissions between their ships. The translation software is having trouble, but it sounds like they're arguing about who should attack first. Sarah nodded grimly. Vexthaler's command ship was still locked in the Defiance's deadly embrace, its hull split open like a cracked egg. The sight of their supposedly invincible leader reduced to floating debris and emergency lighting had shaken the remaining Caltharians more than Sarah had dared hope. Captain. Torres's voice crackled through the comm from deep inside the enemy vessel. I've reached what looks like their main computer core. This thing is completely biological, like a giant brain. And sir, it's still partially functional. Can you access their data? Already on it. These aliens kept detailed records of every raid, every colony they hit. Sir, this is bigger than we thought. The Protection Accord wasn't just convenient for raiders like the Caltharians. It was specifically designed to create defenseless targets. Sarah felt her blood turn cold. Explain. According to these records, several Galactic Council species have been secretly supporting Caltharian raids for decades. They provide intelligence on human colony ships, safe passages through controlled space, even targeting data for the most valuable passengers. The bridge fell silent except for the distant sounds of combat damage control teams working throughout the ship. Sarah stared at the tactical display showing the approaching enemy vessels, but her mind was processing something far more disturbing than an immediate battle. You're saying the galactic government has been feeding human civilians to bone collectors? That's exactly what I'm saying, Captain. And it gets worse. The Caltharians aren't the only predator species being supported this way. There are at least 6 other species receiving similar assistance, all targeting colonies from what the Council calls problematic independent civilizations. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of revelation settle on her shoulders. The Protection Accord hadn't been a well-intentioned law that failed to protect civilians. It had been a tool of genocide, carefully crafted to ensure that species like humanity remained vulnerable to systematic extermination. Sir, Williams called out urgently, the Caltharian fleet is beginning their attack run. All 14 ships, coordinated assault pattern. Sarah opened her eyes and studied the approaching enemies. Each ship was larger than the Defiance, armed with weapons designed specifically for hunting civilian vessels. Under normal circumstances, her battered colony ship wouldn't last 5 minutes against such overwhelming force. But these weren't normal circumstances, and Sarah was beginning to understand that she wasn't fighting just for the 12,000 lives aboard her ship. She was fighting for every human colony that had ever been attacked, every family that had been harvested for alien decorations, every child whose bones now adorned Caltharian armor. Torres, have you found any information about Caltharian weaknesses? Actually, yes, sir. Their ships are heavily biological, which makes them vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic interference. and their navigation systems rely on pheromone trails that can be disrupted by specific chemical compounds. Can we produce those compounds? Already working on it. Give me 10 more minutes and I can turn our waste recycling system into a chemical weapon that'll blind every Caltharian ship in this system. Sarah smiled for the first time since the battle began. Do it, and Torres, while you're at it, download everything from that computer core. The galaxy needs to know exactly who's been feeding humans to the bone collectors. The first wave of Caltharian attacks struck the Defiance like hammers falling on an anvil. The ship shuddered under the impact of organic projectiles that burrowed into the hull before exploding from within. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut as sections of the ship were breached. But the damage was manageable. What the Caltharians hadn't expected was return fire. The Defiance had been designed as a colony ship, but human engineers were clever people. Hidden within the vessel's agricultural sections were hydroponics bays that could be rapidly converted to manufacture explosives. The ship's mining equipment, intended for asteroid processing, made excellent improvised weapons. Even the children's educational computer systems had been programmed with tactical software, just in case. Multiple hits on enemy vessels, the tactical officer reported with satisfaction. Their hulls aren't as tough as they look. Must be all that biological material making them squishy. Through the view screen, Sarah watched one of the attacking Caltharian ships venting atmosphere from multiple breaches. The aliens inside would be scrambling to seal the damage, but their organic technology required time to heal itself, time they wouldn't have in the middle of a firefight. Chemical weapon is ready, Torres announced from inside the captured ship. Deploying now. A cloud of invisible death began spreading from the Defiance's waste ports, carrying molecules specifically designed to interfere with Caltharian sensory systems. Within minutes, enemy ships began showing signs of navigation problems, their attack formations dissolving into chaos as pilots lost the ability to properly coordinate their movements. "Sir," Williams called out excitedly, "I'm receiving a transmission from the outer system. 3 ships on approach vector human configuration." Sarah felt her heart leap. "Reinforcements?" "Unknown, sir. They're not responding to hails, but their transponder codes identify them as the merchant vessel's Lucky Strike, Fortune's Favor, and Backbone of Steel. Those were human cargo haulers, civilian ships with minimal armament and no military training. Against 14 Caltharian warships, they would be nothing more than additional targets." Sarah was about to order them to retreat when Williams continued his report. "Sir, those aren't cargo ships anymore. Sensors show massive weapon modifications, military-grade armor plating, and what looks like experimental shield generators. These ships have been converted for war." On the main screen, the 3 approaching vessels became visible as they dropped out of faster-than-light travel. They had indeed been merchant ships once, but someone had transformed them into something entirely different. Weapons bristled from every available mounting point. Armor plating covered their hulls like metal scales, and energy signatures indicated power plants far beyond anything a civilian vessel should carry. "This is Captain Rebecca O'Malley of the Independent." "Vessel Lucky Strike." A new voice crackled through the communication system. "We heard about your little disagreement with the bone collectors, Captain Chen. Thought you might like some company." Sarah stared at the approaching ships in amazement. "Captain O'Malley, this is a combat zone. You're flying civilian vessels against military targets." O'Malley's laugh was sharp and dangerous. "Civilian vessels? Captain, the moment the Galactic Council decided humans didn't deserve protection, every human ship became a warship. We're just being honest about it now." The 3 converted merchant ships swept past the Defiance and directly into the confused Caltharian formation. Their weapons opened fire in coordinated salvos that spoke of military training and careful preparation. These weren't random merchant captains who had stumbled into a fight. These were humans who had been planning for this moment. The battle turned into a whirlwind of fire and metal as the 3 converted merchant ships tore through the Caltharian formation. Captain O'Malley's Lucky Strike moved like a dancer, its modified engines allowing impossible maneuvers that no cargo hauler should have been capable of. The Fortune's Favor unleashed swarms of missiles that seemed to think for themselves, adapting their attack patterns in real time to counter Caltharian defensive measures. The Backbone of Steel lived up to its name, absorbing punishment that would have crippled a military vessel while returning fire with weapons that definitely hadn't come from any civilian catalog. "How is this possible?" Williams whispered, watching the tactical display in amazement. These are merchant crews fighting like seasoned military units. Sarah was beginning to understand. They've been preparing for this day. How long, I wonder? How long have human civilians been secretly converting their ships while the galaxy believed we were following the Protection Accord? Her question was answered moments later, when more ships began dropping out of faster-than-light travel. First a dozen, then 2 dozen, then so many that the tactical display couldn't track them all. Colony ships like the Defiance, but also miners, freighters, research vessels, even luxury liners. Every type of human spacecraft imaginable, and every single one had been modified for war. "This is Admiral Marcus Kane aboard the Terra's Wrath," a new voice announced over the communication channels. "All human vessels implement broken chain protocol immediately." Sarah's eyes widened. She had heard whispers of something called broken chain during her academy days, but it had always been dismissed as conspiracy theories and wishful thinking. The idea that civilians were secretly preparing for the day when humanity would abandon the Protection Accord had seemed too organized, too coordinated to be real. Apparently, it was very real. "Captain Chen," Admiral Kane continued, "I believe you fired the first shot in humanity's war for independence. Thank you for giving us the excuse we've been waiting for." The Caltharian fleet, which had begun the day hunting a single defenseless colony ship, now found itself surrounded by nearly 50 human vessels. But these weren't the helpless prey they were used to hunting. These were warships disguised as civilian craft, crewed by people who had spent years planning for this moment. "Sir," Torres reported from inside the captured Caltharian vessel, "I've finished downloading their entire database. The intelligence here is incredible. Not only do we have proof of Galactic Council involvement in attacks on human colonies, but we also have tactical data on dozens of other predator species, trade routes used for trafficking, and communication codes for the entire raider network." Sarah nodded, but her attention was focused on the battle unfolding around her ship. The Caltharians were fighting with desperate fury now, realizing that they were no longer the hunters but the hunted. Their organic weapons fired volleys of bone shard projectiles and acid clouds. But the human ships had come prepared for biological warfare. "All vessels," Admiral Kane's voice boomed across the communication channels, "remember the Harvest World's protocol. No Caltharian ship leaves this system. We cannot allow them to warn their allies that humanity has teeth." The Harvest World's protocol. Sarah had never heard the term before, but its meaning became clear as she watched the human fleet's coordinated response. This wasn't just a battle, it was an extermination. Every Caltharian vessel would be destroyed, every crew member eliminated, every piece of evidence of their presence here erased. "Captain," Williams called out, "we're receiving surrender requests from multiple Caltharian ships. They're offering to release prisoners and provide intelligence in exchange for safe passage." Sarah thought of the bone decorations adorning Vexithaler's ship, of the carefully organized trophy rooms that Torres had discovered. How many human children had begged for mercy before being harvested for alien decorations? "Relay this message to all surrendering vessels," she ordered. "Humanity does not accept surrenders from bone collectors. The time for mercy ended when you decided our children made attractive ornaments." The battle raged for another hour, but the outcome was never in doubt. The Caltharians had superior individual technology, but they were facing humans who had spent years preparing for this fight. More importantly, they were facing humans who had finally stopped caring about galactic law and started caring about justice. When the last Caltharian ship exploded in a brief nova of organic fire, the human fleet regrouped around the Defiance. Sarah found herself staring at a display showing nearly 50 vessels, all crewed by people who had decided that outlaws who protected their families were better than citizens who fed them to predators. "Captain Chen," Admiral Kane's voice was warm with approval, "you've done something remarkable today. You've given humanity permission to stop being victims." "Admiral, with respect, I didn't give anyone permission. I just stopped asking for it." Kane's laugh echoed through the communication system. "Well said. Now I believe you have 12,000 colonists who were promised a new home on Haven's Rest. The Terra's Wrath will escort your convoy to ensure safe arrival. And after that, Captain, we change the galaxy. The data your crew recovered from the Caltharian ship proves that the Protection Accord was designed to enable genocide. Once that information reaches human colonies throughout known space, I suspect the Galactic Council is going to have much bigger problems than a few merchant ships carrying illegal weapons." Sarah looked around her bridge at the crew who had followed her into Outlawry without hesitation. These men and women had chosen to protect their people over following alien law. And in doing so, they had started something that would reshape interstellar civilization. Torres, did you manage to recover any Caltharian technology during your boarding operation? Yes, sir. Their bioweapon systems, some of their organic armor plating, and several pieces of their bone crafting equipment. Sarah felt a cold smile spreading across her face. The Caltharians had spent centuries perfecting the art of turning their victims' remains into decorative objects. Perhaps it was time for them to experience their own craftsmanship from a different perspective. Excellent. Have the most impressive pieces prepared for display. I want every human in this fleet to see exactly what the protection accord was protecting us from. Sir, Williams called out, we're receiving a priority transmission from Earth Command. They're demanding an immediate explanation for our violation of interstellar law. Sarah considered the message for a moment, then shook her head. Tell Earth Command that the Defiance no longer recognizes their authority. We are now an independent vessel operating under human law, not alien law. The communication officer's eyes widened. Sir, that's mutiny. No, Lieutenant. That's independence. There's a difference. As the human fleet formed up for the journey to Haven's Rest, Sarah Chen stood on her bridge and watched the debris field that had once been a Caltharian hunting fleet. Somewhere in that expanding cloud of metal and organic matter were the remains of creatures who had viewed humanity as a renewable resource to be harvested at will. They had learned too late that some prey fought back, and some prey, once they started fighting, never stopped. 3 months after the Battle of Haven's Rest, as historians would later call it, Sarah Chen found herself standing in what had once been the main assembly hall of a galactic council station. The ornate chamber, designed to showcase the peaceful cooperation between dozens of alien species, now served as a courtroom where humanity was putting the galaxy itself on trial. The walls still bore the elegant murals depicting various species working together in harmony, but those peaceful images seemed mockingly naive now. Sarah wore her dress uniform, but it was no longer the blue of the colonial fleet. The independent human forces had adopted black uniforms with silver trim, and on her collar were rank insignia that no galactic authority recognized. Admiral Kane stood at the center of the chamber, addressing an audience that included representatives from every major human colony, several alien species that had suffered under the Protection Accord, and a handful of Galactic Council members who had been captured during recent operations. The evidence is overwhelming, Kane announced, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. The Caltharian database recovered by Captain Chen's crew contains detailed records spanning 47 years. During that time, the Galactic Council systematically provided intelligence, safe passage, and targeting information to predator species attacking civilian populations. On the main display screen, a series of documents scrolled past in multiple languages, trade agreements that were actually hunting licenses, diplomatic communications that amounted to shopping lists of vulnerable colonies, financial records showing payments made to raiders for delivering specific types of prisoners. The Zentari Confederacy paid premium rates for children under the age of 10, Kane continued, his voice devoid of emotion. The Mektar Hive requested elderly humans specifically because they believed aging bodies produced superior biochemical compounds. The Vorthak Empire maintained standing orders for pregnant females from any species, claiming they needed the fetuses for their reproductive research programs. Sarah watched the faces in the audience as the horrific details emerged. Human colonists who had lost family members to raiders, alien refugees who had fled their homeworlds after discovering their own government's involvement in the systematic genocide. Even some Galactic Council members seemed genuinely shocked by the scope of the conspiracy. But the most damning evidence, Kane said, activating a new display, comes from the Council's own archives, documents we recovered during our recent liberation of the Central Data Facility on Proxima Station. The new documents were even worse than the Caltharian records. They showed the Protection Accord hadn't been an accident or a well-intentioned mistake. It had been deliberately crafted as a tool of population control, designed to prevent problematic species from developing effective military capabilities. According to internal council communications, Kane read from one of the documents, the Protection Accord was specifically intended to keep aggressive expansionist species vulnerable to predation while maintaining plausible deniability for council member governments. Sarah stepped forward to address the assembly. The term aggressive expansionist species appears in council documents over 2,000 times. In every case, it refers to civilizations that refuse to accept permanent second-class status in galactic society. Humans, obviously, but also the Corvan Republic, the Free Traders Alliance, and at least 15 other species that dared to compete with established council powers. She gestured to a section of the audience where several alien representatives sat together. These species have joined humanity in declaring independence from galactic law. Together, we represent over 4 billion sentient beings who refuse to be victims any longer. The captured council members sat in a separate section, their various forms of alien biology making their expressions difficult to read, but their body language spoke clearly enough. Some seemed defiant, others resigned, and a few appeared genuinely confused about why their victims were so upset about being harvested for profit. The council will argue that they were maintaining galactic peace, Sarah continued. They will claim that the Protection Accord prevented wars between species. But peace built on the systematic murder of civilians isn't peace at all. It's just organized genocide with better public relations. Admiral Kane activated another display, this one showing a star map of human space. Since the Battle of Haven's Rest, 17 additional human colonies have declared independence from galactic law. Each one has begun converting civilian vessels for military use. Each one has expelled Galactic Council representatives and established defensive alliances with neighboring systems. The map zoomed out to show the broader galactic situation. Red zones marked areas where predator species had operated freely under Council protection. Green zones showed the growing network of independent human and allied territories. Yellow zones indicated species that were still officially part of the Galactic Council, but were quietly negotiating with the independence movement. The galaxy is changing, Kane announced. Species that have spent centuries as victims are discovering they don't have to remain victims. And they're discovering that humans make very effective allies when it comes to hunting the hunters. Sarah smiled at that. The human fleet had grown from 50 ships to over 300 in just 3 months. But more importantly, those ships now carried mixed crews. Corvan engineers worked alongside human tactical officers. Free trader navigators shared bridge duty with refugee Vorthak, who had fled their empire's cannibalistic policies. Former victims were learning to become predators. The Galactic Council has demanded that humanity return to compliance with interstellar law, Kane continued. They've threatened sanctions, blockades, and military intervention. They seem to believe that we'll eventually see reason and return to being good little victims who die quietly when told to do so. The Admiral's smile was sharp and predatory. They're going to be disappointed. Sarah stepped forward again, this time addressing the captured council members directly. You created a system where our choices were to be legal victims or illegal survivors. You made it impossible for us to protect our families without becoming criminals in your courts. You turned our children into commodities and our elderly into raw materials for alien industries. She gestured to the walls of the chamber, where Caltharian bone decorations had been mounted as evidence exhibits. But you made one crucial mistake. You assumed that making something illegal would prevent humans from doing it. You forgot that our ancestors spent thousands of years fighting predators much more dangerous than you. The bone decorations gleamed under the chamber's lights, their polished surfaces reflecting the faces of humans, who would never again ask permission to defend their families. Each piece told a story of a life stolen, but they also told a story of justice finally being served. The Galactic Council is hereby informed that humanity withdraws from all treaties, agreements, and accords signed under duress, Admiral Kane announced formally. We no longer recognize Council authority over human territory or human citizens. We will defend our colonies, protect our civilians, and hunt down every predator that threatens our people. He paused, looking directly at the captured council members. And we will do it all as proud outlaws because we've learned that sometimes being a criminal is the only way to remain human. Sarah looked around the chamber one final time, taking in the faces of people who had chosen freedom over safety, justice over law, and protection over permission. Tomorrow they would face the consequences of their rebellion. The Galactic Council would respond with force. Other predator species would seek revenge, and the entire galactic political structure would probably collapse into chaos. But tonight, for the first time in decades, human children would sleep safely without wondering if raiders would come in the darkness, and that was worth any price the galaxy demanded. 2 years after the trial of the galaxy, Sarah Chen walked through the corridors of her flagship Defiance, now the command vessel of the 4th Independent Fleet. The ship bore little resemblance to the colony transport that had sparked a revolution. Its hull was armored with plates taken from destroyed Council warships. Its weapon systems incorporated technology salvaged from a dozen different predator species, and its corridors displayed trophies that told the story of humanity's transformation from prey to apex predator. She paused before a particular display case, one that drew visitors from across the independent territories. Inside, mounted on black velvet, was the complete exoskeleton of War Chief Vexthaler the Spine Render. The massive carapace had been carefully preserved and articulated, its forearms positioned as if reaching out to claim one final victim. The bone decorations that had once adorned the alien's body were still there, but now they served a different purpose entirely. "Still gives me chills," said a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Dr. Elizabeth Martinez, the ship's chief xenobiologist and former passenger from Section C. Her twin daughters, now 7 years old, stood beside her wearing the black and silver uniforms of the Independent Fleet's Youth Auxiliary. "Good," Sarah replied. "It should give you chills. That thing spent 40 years turning human children into ornaments. Now it's an ornament itself." The display case bore a simple plaque. War Chief Vexthaler the Spine Render, killed attempting to harvest human civilians for bone decorations. His skeleton was prepared using traditional Caltharian techniques. Justice served with interest. It had been Dr. Martinez who suggested using Caltharian preservation methods on their former enemies. The irony was too perfect to resist, and the psychological impact on surviving predator species had been devastating. Nothing demoralized raiders quite like seeing their leaders' remains displayed using their own cultural practices. "Captain," one of the Martinez twins said, "is it true that the Galactic Council is finally ready to surrender?" Sarah knelt down to meet the child's eyes. "Not surrender, Emma. They're ready to negotiate." "There's a difference." The little girl frowned thoughtfully. "What's the difference?" "Surrender means they admit they were wrong and accept our terms. Negotiation means they still think they can make a deal that lets them keep some of their power." Emma's sister Sophia spoke up. "Are we going to let them?" Sarah smiled at the question. These children had grown up during the war, had seen their parents transform from helpless civilians into hardened fighters. They understood concepts of justice and power that most adults in the old galactic order had never grasped. That depends on whether they're willing to accept real justice or just want to make the fighting stop. The ship's communication system crackled to life. "Captain Chen to the bridge. Priority transmission from Earth." Sarah stood, ruffling Sophia's hair as she did. "Duty calls. You two keep studying hard. The galaxy needs smart people to help rebuild it properly." The bridge of the Defiance had been expanded significantly. Since the Battle of Haven's Rest, it now served as the tactical command center for an entire fleet, with stations for coordinating everything from supply logistics to deep space reconnaissance. The main view screen showed the current tactical situation. Over 800 independent vessels scattered across a dozen star systems, all waiting for the outcome of negotiations with what remained of the Galactic Council. "Report," Sarah ordered as she settled into the captain's chair. Lieutenant Commander Torres, now her first officer, gestured to the communication station. "Direct transmission from Admiral Kane on Earth. The Council delegation has arrived in the Sol system with a formal proposal." Sarah nodded. Earth had been chosen as the site for final negotiations, specifically because it was humanity's most heavily defended system. If the Council tried any treachery, they would discover that humans had learned to be very thorough when it came to protecting what they valued. "Put the Admiral through." Kane's face appeared on the screen, but Sarah barely recognized the man who had rescued her fleet 2 years ago. The stress of commanding a revolution had aged him considerably, and there was a hardness in his eyes that spoke of difficult decisions made in desperate times. "Sarah," he said without preamble, "they're offering everything. Complete recognition of independent territories, reparations for all species affected by the Protection Accord, dismantling of the predator support networks, even formal apologies for 47 years of systematic genocide. And in exchange, they want amnesty for council members who participated in the genocide programs. They're claiming they were following established policy and didn't understand the true consequences of their actions." Sarah felt her jaw clench. They want us to forgive them for feeding our children to bone collectors. That's exactly what they want. And Sarah, there's pressure from some of our own allies to accept. The Corvan Republic is war-weary. The free traders are losing money during the fighting. And several human colonies are concerned about the long-term economic impact of continued hostilities. Through the view screen, Sarah could see the debris field that marked the site of the Battle of Proxima Station, where human forces had finally broken the back of organized predator operations in this sector. Thousands of people had died in that fight, both human and alien, but the victory had been decisive. No more would raiders enjoy Council protection when hunting civilian populations. Admiral, patch me through to all fleet commanders. I want them to hear this decision directly. Within minutes, her communication panel showed connections to over 50 different ships. Fleet commanders, colony representatives, and allied species leaders all waited to hear whether humanity would accept peace with conditions or continue fighting for justice without compromise. This is Captain Sarah. Chen speaking to all commanders, she began. Admiral Kane has informed me that the Galactic Council is prepared to end their support for predator species and recognize our independence. In exchange, they want amnesty for the officials who spent decades enabling genocide. She paused, looking around the bridge at her crew. These men and women had followed her from frightened civilians to hardened warriors, had watched their friends die in battles against creatures that viewed sentient beings as renewable resources. I want each of you to think about something, Sarah continued. Think about the children who were harvested for bone decorations. Think about the elderly people who were processed into biochemical compounds. Think about the pregnant women who were captured for reproductive experiments. Then ask yourself, do the people who enabled all of that deserve amnesty? The responses came quickly through the communication channels. Captain O'Malley of the Lucky Strike was the first to speak. Amnesty for genocide? Not from this ship. The Corvan delegation votes for continued military action, announced Commander Veltar from the Allied alien forces. Our people demand justice, not political convenience. One by one, every commander in the fleet registered their opinion. The vote was unanimous: no amnesty for genocide, regardless of the political or economic consequences. Admiral Kane, Sarah said formally, please convey the following message to the Galactic Council delegation. The Independent Alliance rejects any peace agreement that includes amnesty for war criminals. We demand full justice for all individuals who participated in enabling genocide against civilian populations. Kane's expression was grim, but unsurprised. You realize this means the war continues? The Council has made it clear that they won't accept full accountability. Then they've made their choice, Sarah replied. We offered them the chance to end this with justice and honor. If they prefer to end it with defeat and disgrace, that's their decision. She looked around the bridge one final time, seeing the faces of people who had chosen the hard path of justice over the easy path of expedient peace. All fleet commanders, implement Liberation Protocol 7. We're going to finish what we started when we chose to protect our families instead of following alien law. As the communication channels closed and her fleet began preparing for the final phase of the war, Sarah walked back to the trophy display. War Chief Vex Theller's preserved remains gleamed under the ship's lights, a permanent reminder of what happened when predators mistook humans for prey. Soon, she thought, the galaxy would have an entire museum of such reminders, and future generations of children would grow up in a universe where being civilized didn't require being defenseless, where protection was a right rather than a privilege, and where justice mattered more than political convenience. She had started this journey as Captain Sarah Chen of the Colonial Fleet, a woman who followed orders and respected regulations. She would end it as the admiral of an independent fleet, a leader who understood that some things were worth more than peace, more than law, more than the approval of those who had never faced the choice between their children's lives and alien politics. The galaxy had outlawed protection, so humanity had learned to walk proudly draped in the skeletons of those who thought that made them easy prey.